Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversants are Aaron Kindsvatter and David King. And in this conversation, we talk about a project that they are working very hard at called the Society for the Ethical Practice of Psychotherapy. This society is for people who want to provide psychotherapy that is unencumbered by ideological persuasion, such as what is called wokeness. It brings together various therapists, gives them the tools to stand their ground and find each other, support each other, and also to provide such neutral therapy to people who are looking for that. Links to the Society for the Ethical Practice of Psychotherapy are down there in the description. Without further ado, here is Aaron Kindsvatter and David King. Lay it on me, fellas. What's going on? What's going on in this world of the psychotherapists, the head shrinkers?
Well, that's interesting because in some ways we are talking about psychotherapy as opposed to
Yeah.
psychotherapy.
Somehow they shrunk their own heads, didn't they?
Yeah, something happened, man. It's a real problem.
Shrinking heads, shrinking worldviews.
Shrinking heads and shrinking worldviews, and it has implications for the people who are going to be seeking out psychotherapy, and it has implications for the health of the profession. And, where I noticed this, I've been worried about this for a number of years now, but I had a friend of mine who recently came to me and was saying, hey, I think I could use some help. And this person's in a different state than me. So from somewhere where I don't know any of the psychotherapists personally. And he said, I think I could use some help. And he said, how do I go about finding a good psychotherapist? And I realized that I didn't have an answer. Once upon a time, I would have just said, oh, go to Psychology Today. They have a therapist search engine. You can just hit in your area code, and then you can read the profiles of the therapists that are available. And I found myself very reluctant to leave it at that. And so I kept giving him these additional instructions. Look for somebody that's older, look for somebody that doesn't look like they're going to be bringing, the various identities into the session very much. And he was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean identities? And I found that it's just really hard to explain to him what was going on within the profession, because people who are out there who are just seeking psychotherapists, they don't know about the ideological capture of the profession, and then trying to explain it and what to look out for became very difficult. So I became interested in helping psychotherapy consumers and would-be consumers to be able to identify or to differentiate between those persons who see it as part of their purview to use various kinds of manipulations and pressures within the context of the therapeutic alliance to push somebody into a worldview. In other words, to differentiate people who would be invested in indoctrinating a vulnerable patient coming in, and those people who view their jobs as, bringing the wisdom inherent in the psychotherapeutic process to bear on a person's difficulties. And right now, there's not a very good way to do that.
So there's a opportunity here.
Well, I would say there's a need. There is no, when therapists create their profiles on a site like Psychology Today, there's no box to tick that says, I inject critical social justice into my practice, and I assume that all people of color are victims of an oppressive system, and my therapy will reflect that. And I think that all non-persons of colors, which is to say white persons, are oppressors. And I put that into the psychotherapy that I provide. There's no kind of box that you can check. The boxes are, issues like I treat anxiety disorders, or I treat people with various kinds of sexual disorders or depression or things like that.
But not kinds of treatment. That's assumed by like how you're classified as a therapist, psychotherapist,
Right.
analytic psychologist and stuff. So there's all these different categories of therapy,
Right.
but none of them are explicitly ideologically have like ideological tags on them.
Well, you could say that there are some therapists who specialize in LGBTQ, but that also is dangerous, because there are people who do have issues around their sexuality and their gender that need to be explored. And so I wouldn't want to say to somebody, like, avoid someone who has an LGBTQ tag in their descriptions. The chances are probably that they're more woke and go more towards the critical social justice kind of things. But some of them are like, are practicing in good conscience to help people figure out the implications of what it means to be gay, for example, or to help them navigate, gender dysphoria. So there is, like, you can indicate, that I focus on LGBTQ issues, but still, it's hard to tell whether the therapist that has the profile is, if they're doing psychotherapy or psychotherapy, if you understand. If they're trying to inject politics into the work, then that's psychotherapy. And if they are more interested in a person's, individual perspectives and desire to navigate the nuances of what this means for their life, well, that's psychotherapy. And there are a lot of people who need that. I work in Burlington, Vermont, and I work with people around issues of coming out, and even issues of dealing with prejudice against being gay. And you would think that wouldn't happen in an ultra-progressive town like Burlington, but it does. And so it's important that there are people there who know about those issues, but it's equally important to be with a therapist who isn't going to take advantage of their power in the session to try to indoctrinate somebody into their point of view.
And David, how do you factor in to what Aaron's saying here?
Yeah, well, as far as the mission goes, I mean, I'll just share some lived experience myself. I was looking for a therapist about a little over a year ago now. And, Aaron had talked about folks who were unaware of the cultural happenings. Well, I'm sort of in this space, like I currently work for the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. I've been interested in these issues for a while. And with that awareness, I was actually pretty hesitant to even seek the services to begin with, because I didn't know for sure that when I looked for a therapist, I was definitely going to get a therapist. It was possible that in the process of looking for one, I could end up spending a couple $100s before realizing that the person I was working with was not going to be an ideological fit for me, and as a result of that, I ended up like sort of just going through friends and polling them. But, for some people, that's a sensitive topic too. Like, hey, you see a therapist? I would like, I'd like to find one. And then, to ask, like, does this person treat you like an individual person? Do they ever talk about your, race, class, immigration status, things like that? Or are they just talking to you? So eventually I did find a decent one, but I felt like there is a need for people who are doing this work ethically, which I bet is the vast majority of them, to be able to signal that, like, when you come to me, you are going to get a therapist, and I'm going to treat you like you, the individual. So that was a need that I felt. I believe it's a need that many feel. We are now getting feedback as an organization from people that it's something they're looking for.
As an organization.
Yes.
So do tell us about this.
Yeah, so we're the Society for the Ethical Practice of Psychotherapy. This is something Aaron and I have just launched a couple months ago. We're starting to step in the direction of getting a few things together. Our main goals are to build community of therapists who will sign on to our commitments that we have. We'll get into those a little bit later, into the details of what those commitments are. And then also to provide continuing education materials for people in the psychotherapy profession that focus on treating people as individuals, that can kind of explore some of the different social phenomena that are happening right now in a fair kind of way, trying to be unbiased and as apolitical as possible, while still also telling the truth about these things. And I don't know, Aaron, would you like to pick up a little bit more about that?
I just with that latter part. So I think one of our primary goals, as David suggests, is so that people aren't placed into the situation that David was placed into, where, he needs to see, he wants to see a psychotherapist, but he doesn't know, what he's going to be getting into. I will also say that I believe it to be a devastating experience to go to a psychotherapist and then find out at session 3, after you've really started to trust the person, when they then kind of come clean about what their objective is for you and your ideology. So there's that, but the latter part that David is talking about with the continuing education piece, one of the things about this ideology, this critical social justice, queer theory approach to psychotherapy, is that it is a predatory ideology, and it's always looking to recruit more people into it, and it just wants to grow, kind of like a tumor. And so as a result of this reality, what is now happening is that licensing boards are beginning to, for psychologists, and I would imagine some counselors in some states, licensing boards are beginning to require that therapists, as part of their continuing education, be required to take credits in so-called DEI, or so-called anti-racism. And
are they also issuing or requiring the issuing of equity statements or something like that yet, far as you know?
I've not yet heard of that.
I know schools are doing that.
I don't see anything that would stop them from doing that, anything at all. I'm almost certain that's what's next, because if they require, for them, a little critical social justice is good, and a whole bunch of critical social justice is even better. And so, yeah, they can require right now, at least in the state of Vermont, they require certain requirements that you put into an informed consent document, which lets your patients know who you are, and those things are like your name, your license number, your orientation to therapy, cost of the session, things like that. Because they have the ability to require those things in what a therapist must have available to the public, it'd be very easy for activist members of, for example, the counseling board, to say, oh, well, also as part of your as part of your informed consent statement, you must have a land acknowledgement or something. Yeah. I'm sure, Benjamin, that people are thinking about that.
So with that thought in mind, these equity statements, I know in colleges they're asking teachers to profess that they're there to be fair and to lift up the downtrodden and equitize education or whatever. Is the statement that is part of what people are, well, you guys call them commitments. When people join your organization, they sign a commitment or a pledge, right? So it is kind of a equity statement, but what's the content of it? Or it's a badge. It's a signal, right?
It is a signal. And before we get into that, and I think it would be excellent if we talked about these commitments, I would like to just read you a paragraph from one of the articles that is all about the ideology that we're worried about. And this is a direct quote from a psychotherapist who wrote an article, which is on what is it, David, the NIH website?
Yeah, I believe it's the NIH that hosts this article.
Yeah, right. So this article is called "Talking with White Clients About Race," and like here's just a direct quote from that. The first in-step session of this model is also likely the most difficult for the anti-racist white therapist. In order to maintain our therapeutic stance and to preserve the working relationship, our first task when addressing racism in therapy is simply to listen to the client's story and create a safe holding space where honest feelings can be explored. Although racist worldviews are very difficult to hear without immediately pushing back against, this step is essential to protect the therapeutic alliance and keep clients engaged before working to increase their racial consciousness. I mean, I can barely read that without laughing, but it's like, so what this person is saying is, and you have to read the article to understand some of the things that are in it. Like you could even say like, well, of course it would be hard for a therapist to hear someone who's racist talking about the racism. But this author makes clear in their statement that they are an anti-racist therapist. And one of the tenets of anti-racism is there's racism and there's anti-racism, and anything that doesn't fall under the purview of anti-racism is racist. So, so something like, I consider myself a traditional liberal, and I believe in ethical colorblindness. It doesn't mean that I don't recognize that people may not be of different races, but I treat them as individuals. And this person is saying, would absolutely hold me or any patient that they might have to be racist. And he's talking with such contempt about people who might hold that point of view. But what he's also saying is, you have to wait until the patient is dependent on the process. He's just using acceptable terms to say that. He's saying you have to hold a safe environment and you have to preserve the therapeutic relationship until, and his last line gives it away, until they are more open to expanding their racial consciousness. And it's like, if a person, like if your average person off the street were to read that, they may not really understand what this is talking about. But any reasonable paraphrase of that says, you've got to get them in the door and make them feel comfortable before you start to indoctrinate them, into this view that anyone who doesn't think like them is a racist person and is perpetuating racism and not even aware of it. Yeah. So it's pretty gross.
So yeah, somehow that is on. You said NIH, right? So what is that again?
National Institutes of Health.
Okay, so there's an NIH in the UK, which is their entire
NHS.
NHS, okay.
Yep.
NIH, okay. So, but this is enshrined in the regime or the the halls of power that dictate
Yeah.
what health is. So,
Yeah.
and we've known that. I mean, things keep on coming out. Just, I think it was yesterday where UCLA, I think, or another California education's medical school is basically half the students can't pass any of these exams because they're
Yeah.
working so hard to get, equity in their
Yeah.
enrollment numbers. But that's one thing for a doctor to not know what to do. It's another
Yeah.
thing for a therapist to know what to do and to be decidedly trying to warp your mind into the mold of critical social justice. And so how are you standing against that, or how are you countering that with your commitments?
Could I make one more? I want to get. I just want to make one more quick statement about that, and that is, I have found since I started practicing that the vast majority of people that are coming to receive therapy are coming in because they have been in these coercive relationships that they're very much psychologically off balance. A lot of them have been coerced into sex that they didn't want to have, and have been coerced in other ways. So they are extremely vulnerable to further coercion. And so that's just for folks who might not understand where most people are when they start the therapeutic process. They are intensely vulnerable to exploitation. And so I think that adds a little bit of background that helps explain why the commitments that we are hoping that people will sign on to, why they're so important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I can go into a little bit now about, first of all, how our commitments would differ from a call to indoctrinate, and then sort of into what the actual details of them are. And I think where they differ from, this sort of, in this case, a social justice call, but it really could be based in any sort of ideology that requires the adherence of the ideology to spread it, right? So, currently, the social fad is social justice, right? And that's where people are going. But we've seen other, practices in the past that have also been somewhat destructive and also kind of achieved viral status, right? So, once social justice is no longer a major social phenomenon, it's likely that, we and people who are interested in the same things we are will be contending with a different thing. So anyway, all that to say that what we ask people to commit to is not requiring them to buy into any particular political view. If you are a believer in critical social justice, as long as you're not bringing that into the therapy room, we actually couldn't care less, in as much as that belief doesn't require you to try to spread the belief, right? That's kind of the catching point there. We're just basically asking folks to, when you're in the room, you're a therapist first and foremost. You're not there to promote any particular political ideology. You're not there to change somebody's mind about that unless it's something, that's conducive to their health. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. You're expected to be a therapist when you get into the room.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and just go through the commitments. So we've got, sorry about this, we've got 6 of them. And I'm just going to go ahead and read them off. So the first is psychotherapists treat psychotherapy patients with empathy and unconditional positive regard. Psychotherapists do not attribute negative or stereotypical qualities to psychotherapy patients' race, ethnicity, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, occupation, or religious or political identity. So effectively, you're not making assumptions of people based on whatever their demographic markers are.
Mm-hmm.
Second, in conducting psychotherapy or making psychological assessments, psychotherapists treat psychotherapy patients as individuals. As such, psychotherapists do not make assumptions about individual situations based on their race, ethnicity, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, occupation, religious or political affiliations. Moreover, psychotherapists do not make judgments about individual situations relative to the situations of other individuals with whom they may differ in terms of race, ethnicity, and so on. Third, psychotherapists recognize the dehumanizing effect that discriminatory behavior has on psychotherapy patients. Psychotherapists are prepared to professionally assist and advocate for individuals who have been the targets of discrimination. And crucially, anyone can be a target of discrimination regardless of their perceived social position. Fourth, psychotherapists realize the inherent power differential that exists in the practitioner-patient relationship. In recognizing this, psychotherapists understand that psychotherapy patients are vulnerable to exploitation, including political and ideological exploitation. As such, under no circumstances do psychotherapists ever exploit their patients. Moreover, psychotherapists never impose their beliefs, values, behaviors, creeds, ideologies, or politics onto their patients. Fifth, psychotherapists communicate with patients and colleagues clearly. They do not utilize jargon or buzzwords in their communications without having already established that the patient understands them the same way they do. When important words have more than one meaning, psychotherapists are clear about how they are using the words in question. Psychotherapists do not use sophistry or any other forms of fallacious reasoning in an attempt to persuade. And finally, psychotherapists realize that ideological trends sometimes influence prescribed practices within the field, but that while ideological trends are short-lived, the field of psychotherapy continues to develop over a much longer time span. Psychotherapists continually work to separate ideology from science. When utilizing new approaches within the field, psychotherapists keep their patients fully informed as to possible trade-offs and possible consequences of therapeutic endeavors. Psychotherapists keep their patients informed about the limitations of and contradictions in research findings pertaining to concepts utilized in psychotherapeutic endeavors. Psychotherapists rely on the scientific process, not ideological conviction, in determining the merit of therapeutic interventions.
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, and there's, if you push against a certain amount of them, you're going to run into problems, and then you might turn the therapy session into a lecture session if you try to avoid jargon and try to always be squaring your any given theory that you're utilizing, and then try to prove it or disprove it within the therapeutic context. Something like internal family systems, which I think does have legs, but if the therapist is saying, this is a tool. It has bounds. I don't know the exact bounds, but let's see how this helps you, or how we can help, how this model can help in this situation. It's just really interesting, specifically about psychotherapy, because you do see that people are trying out new ideas, and the therapy session can be an experiment. It's kind of a scientific experiment. Is this going to work for you? Is this not going to work for you? And if you're doing it with integrity, then you say, okay, we're going to see if this works, and then we're going to catalog the change. We're going to catalog the process and see if it's going towards the better or worse, or seeing if there's growth, or whatever parameter you're using to gauge the worth of any given therapy. But that's kind of an aside.
Yeah, it is a lot. In some ways, I think what these 6 commitments do is they kind of turn, I think these 10 years ago, none of these commitments would have been the least bit controversial. And today, they would be extremely controversial, because if you were to follow these 6 commitments, you could no longer bring convictions that because a person is a particular color, they have X amount of privilege or X amount of oppression. Like it forces you to sort of remind yourself that this is an individual that I'm working with.
Yeah, you would have to recognize that as an ideology. And a lot of people their heads are so far up the butt of critical social justice that they can't even see it as an ideology. They say
right. Like on campus, if you were to say, I don't know about this white privilege thing. I don't know. Like if we're opening the door to talking about white privilege, or are we then opening the door to talking about black privilege, and what does that really get us if we start down that road? And, it's just a bad idea, and it's a gross way of thinking, but it is like, that's the conventional wisdom on college campuses right now. That is, not only is that not controversial, that's required practically.
Yeah.
So, but I think also about that, I think therapy has gotten to the point, for some reason, Maybe it's because of the critical social justice ideology where narrative is considered more important than the truth, that we've gotten to the point where it's more or less anything goes as long as it appears to be consistent with the quote right thinking for the profession. And so that latter one, it asks people to stop and say, okay, what are the potential trade-offs of what I am pushing here? And is the person that I am working with developmentally capable of understanding what those trade-offs are? So in some ways, these commitments are just good common sense and wouldn't have been controversial 10 years ago. Nowadays, and it's not because we mean them to be that way, but it's just because if these tenets are basically the foundation of Enlightenment rationalism, and Enlightenment rationalism is anathema to critical social justice. So in some ways, one of the things that these commitments do is they do stand a lot of the assumptions inherent in critical social justice on its head. And so that's part of it. I also think that it also stands a lot of the rhetorical tactics that allow critical social justice to what's the term, to flourish in the profession.
Yeah.
Yeah. It says we're not going to use those rhetorical tactics anymore because there's so many times where people will take really important words like racism and then migrate the word so that it either means more than one thing or the definition is expanded, as it was with anti-racism to, so that almost anything other than a collectivist Maoist approach to worldview would be considered racist. And so what we're saying is, no, we're not going to do that. Like if you want to push that outside of therapy, well, okay, but you're going to have to be upfront about the fact that, I think it's a really good idea to break people down into identity groups and then to create tension between those identity groups so that the oppressed can have more of a voice. And we might even sort of push down the people who we view as having the most privilege in order to raise up, the people who have more privilege.
And charge them for our services.
And then charge them for our service. And really screw them up too. There's this book called it's the best book I've read on this so far. It's called very accurately, I think, The Rape of the Mind. And this was as soon as I read The Rape of the Mind, I very much recognized some of the things that Leslie Elliott had mentioned in her experiences when she was going through her master's program. And essentially what it is that there is all this pressure on you to feel a sense of shame and for who you are and to sort of admit your different privileges and so forth and so on. And there's tons and tons and tons of pressure. And then the only way to escape that pressure, there's this little door marked ideological compliance. And if you go through that door and then you start putting pressure on other people, then you don't have to feel the guilt and the shame. But that process is precisely what the author of The Rape of the Mind outlines as part of the process that was involved in getting political prisoners to change their ideology, to renounce the ideals of whatever country that they were from and to embrace the ideals of the enemy. And so it involved tons of shame and tons of confession. And once you get someone to admit to or confess one little thing, then they're more open into confessing something else. And then they're open to getting other people to confess. And once you start confessing, you are socially accepted and you escape from the pressure. And so people, there's this term going around now called gaslighting, where you're essentially forced to accept an absurd reality and to deny objective reality. And that's what these series of techniques, this is exactly what's going on in counselor training right now. There's peer pressure to accept so-called anti-racism and so-called DEI. There's tremendous pressure to join in on that ideology. And the only way to escape from the pressure is through, you're negatively reinforced to adopt the ideology to get them to ease up on you. And it's, I think that eventually, maybe in 10 years, people will look back on this time and realize how very close we came. But this long way of getting around to, this is what the current students in counselor training are being subjected to. And they're being also told, this is the way that you treat your patients. Like you have to keep coming back at them with their, and railing against their so-called racism. And the justification for this is that, well, this might cause harm to a particular patient, but it's in the greater good because all the person in that patient's life are no longer going to be harmed by their, quote, racist attitudes. Mm-hmm. So it's really a creepy system of a justification for what amounts to psychological abuse of people who are extremely vulnerable. Crazy stuff.
So your organization, Society for Ethical Psychotherapy, there's another P, but psychotherapy practice.
Society for the Ethical Practice of Psychotherapy.
Right.
Yeah. Practice of psychotherapy.
Yes.
So you guys have, it's kind of a gathering of people who are willing to commit to these ideals that aren't necessarily counter social justice. They're counter the, I guess, the way that social justice propagates by acting like a cult or a religion.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So it's an appeal or a dedication to neutrality, to empathy, and to forthrightness, or I guess just clarity and purpose, and a commitment to not be jargony or culty or anything like that, which is good. So this is a place, you said it's for building community. Is it like a register for people can find therapists who are willing to commit to these ideals, or is it for therapists who are willing to commit to these ideals?
So the register is a medium-term goal. Currently, we are not making the list public because we know that some people will find belonging to an organization like this possibly, something that may harm them publicly, right? Or at least maybe they may perceive it that way. So we're not making our member list public right now. We are gathering people together, and we're likely to have some events for them, like meet and greets, things like that. Also, they're able to contact us with resources. We can provide them with things like that. But that is something medium term we're thinking about, which is to have, for whoever wants to be on such a list, a way of finding people who have made these commitments that, for people who are seeking therapy.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that people get when they join, we have made these electronic icons that people can put into their email tags onto their website. So I have them on my email tags and my website. And when you click on it, the icon has healing through truth and fidelity to the individual, and then it has our website on it, and David made us a very, very nice website. But what we hope is to spread the word about these icons. And so what I was saying earlier about boxes that people could check on sites like Psychology Today. It would be great if there was if there was a box that could be checked on sites like Psychology Today that would say member for the Society for the Ethical Practice of Psychotherapy, that would be awesome. But in the meantime, when someone is looking for therapists and they come across the Society for Ethical Practice of Psychotherapy on someone's website, they can go to it, they can look at the commitments and see if that's for them. And so what we're hoping is to take some of the guesswork and some of the hesitation that people might experience in seeking psychotherapy. David mentioned his experience. I just wrote, with David's assistance, an article outlining what the Society for the Ethical Practice of Psychotherapy is. And in there, I explain how counseling as a profession has gone far awry. And I explain in there how the Society for the Ethical Practice of Psychotherapy is coming back. And it was posted on the FAIR Substack. And it appears to have been very well received, but at least 3 or 4 people in the comments all said some version of the same thing, that they were really glad we were doing this because they knew that they needed psychotherapy, but they were really afraid that, they would run afoul of woke psychotherapists. And so they were going without. And so, one of the things that I'm really excited about is in making sure that people don't have to go without, because there'll be enough psychotherapists out there who will, are willing to commit to these kind of common sense commitments, and then to indicate to potential psychotherapy patients that they have committed to those, and so that people can begin to look for this icon and know that at least there are those people who are safe, and if nothing else, they can make contact with a safer therapist, and then the therapist might be able to recommend other people who they know will not take advantage of the patient. So even if they're full.
And if a practitioner were to be listening to this podcast and want to, sign up for that, or just to learn more, they can go to our website, ethicaltherapy.org. And then there's a form on which you would sign up. You'll be on our member list, and then you'll also receive a link so that you can download the logos. We have a few little blurbs too about having committed to it that are a lot more concise than what I just read to you a moment ago. And also they'll, as a result, receive our monthly newsletter.
Yeah, which David just put out the first of those, and it was very, very good. What we do is during the month we collect news stories pertaining to psychotherapy, and we'll put those into a monthly reading list for people to check out, and then we'll share the view of those stories from within the commitments of the Society for the Ethical Practice of Psychotherapy. So
we just give our takes on things happening in the news related to that.
Takes on things. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that's great.
You guys just launched recently, so it's rather fresh, brand new, getting off the ground and stuff. So as more information comes out from you guys via podcasts like mine and others and other news sources, or at least media appearances, hopefully the ball gets rolling. But there is definitely a need for places or groups or vectors such as you are presenting for people to find each other and to cultivate a return and maybe some sort of safe space from ideological capture, which ironically has used safe space to propagate.
It's almost we're creating a secret handshake for the silent majority in some way, right? Which I think is overall what we all are looking for, right? This indicator that you normal too? Oh yeah, you're normal too. Okay.
I think that's one of the things that some of the people who have become members have told us, and I understand this completely, is that if you don't go along with this, and even if you're quiet about it, it can be quite lonely. and quite isolating
Yeah.
to be, in the psychotherapy profession and just be surrounded by people who are, just, just spouting bumper sticker, wisdom ad nauseum. And it can be quite lonely to be a part of that group and say, I really don't belong here, and I can kind of get along by staying quiet. But I think community is the most important for the practitioners. Community is really important too, and it's not just the sharing of resources, but it's having a place where you belong, and regardless of who you are or what your politics are, if you can go along with the commitments, then you're good. Like, and so it's just a place to like come together and know that you're welcome. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's such an important human need is to just feel welcome in your space.
Yeah, we call
So
it
that's
politically inclusive space.
a politically inclusive space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A kumbaya for the politically homeless.
A kumbaya for the politically homeless. I love it.
And
That's
you
great.
can even come to our home if you already have one. It's all right. Yeah.
Oh,
That's right. Yeah. If you're already somewhere else, but you wanna have another place to go, you are certainly more than welcome. We love people here.
oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I want to keep this particular episode short so it acts more as as a shareable, conscious raising thing rather than a deep dive that only certain people have the attention span or the time to invest to itself. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys about your project. I will link to it down in the description. Is there anything else that you guys want to plug? And also, you should say the website aloud again, just for...
Yes. For me, just join us and donate at ethicaltherapy.org. And I don't know, Aaron, do you have anything else?
Um, you're not alone. Like if you're watching this and you're in a space where you feel alone, you're not. And come see us, and we'll have a pretty soon here. We're going to have a virtual cocktail hour and get to know each other, and just you have a space to come and kind of be yourself and hang out. So you're not alone.
Excellent.
Benjamin, thank you
words.
so very much.
Yes. Thanks a lot for your time.
My pleasure. Boop. All right.